To understand the story of the awakened mind, we must first descend into the deepest, heaviest slumber of history. We must cast our minds back, drifting through the corridors of deep time, leaving behind the noise of the modern city, the hum of the machine, and the written word. We must travel back before the pyramids rose from the sand, before the first stone spear was chipped from flint, before the first human foot pressed a print into the mud of the African Rift Valley. We travel further still, dissolving the millennia like sugar in hot water, until we arrive at a time some 50 million years ago. This is the Eocene epoch. The world is a vast, humid greenhouse. The polar ice caps have melted, dissolving into the rising oceans, and the earth is swaddled in a thick blanket of warmth. It is a planet of green silence. There are no engines, no voices, no bells. There is only the wind moving through the colossal ferns, the relentless drumbeat of tropical rain, and the immense, vibrating drone of a trillion insect wings. Here, in the cradle of the prehistoric canopy, the drama of our story begins not with a man, but with a leaf. Picture, if you will, the ancestors of the forests we know today. These were not the orderly orchards of civilization, but a chaotic, tangled riot of vegetation fighting a silent, desperate war for the sun. Giant trees, their bark rough and scarred, shot upward like pillars in a cathedral of mist. Vines, thick as pythons, strangled the trunks, climbing over one another in a slow-motion wrestle for survival. And down in the shadows, in the understory, where the light filtered through in dappled, golden shafts, the smaller shrubs existed in a state of perpetual vulnerability. In this ancient world, to be a plant was to be under siege. The enemy was small, multitudinous, and insatiable. Beetles with carapaces of iridescent green, slugs the size of a human hand, and caterpillars with jaws like shears moved through the greenery with a singular purpose: to devour. The forest was not merely a landscape, it was a banquet. Every soft shoot, every unfolding bud, every tender leaf was a potential meal for the crawling legions of the Eocene. The air hummed with the sound of chewing, a microscopic violence that threatened to strip the forest bare. But the plants were not passive victims. They were, and remain, the greatest chemists on the surface of the earth. Rooted in place, unable to run or fight with claws, they fought with atoms. Deep within the cellular machinery of a certain nondescript shrub, a distant ancestor of what we would one day call Kophia genetic lottery was taking place. Over millions of generations, through the slow, grinding trial and error of evolution, the plant began to synthesize a new compound. It drew nitrogen from the soil, carbon from the air, and hydrogen from the water, weaving them together into a specific, elegant lattice. This was not a nutrient. It was not a structural fiber. It was a weapon. To the chemist, it is a white, crystalline powder, bitter to the taste. To the plant, it was a guardian spirit summoned from the elements. This molecule, which we know as caffeine, was born from the necessity of survival. It was a biological shield, a chemical armor deployed to protect the tender, energy-rich leaves and beans from destruction. Imagine the first encounter. A prehistoric beetle, driven by the simple biological imperative of hunger, lands on the glossy leaf of this mutating shrub. It takes a bite, expecting the usual rush of plant sugars and cellulose. But instead, it ingests a high concentration of this novel alkaloid. The reaction is immediate and catastrophic for the insect. The caffeine acts as a potent neurotoxin. It binds to the receptors in the beetle's tiny nervous system, firing the neurons uncontrollably. The insect twitches. Its movements become erratic, jagged, confused. The paralysis sets in. The hunger vanishes, replaced by a systemic failure of the body. The beetle falls from the leaf, landing in the leaf litter below, leaving the plant wounded but alive. Wordlessly, chemically, the lesson was encoded in the genetics of the forest. This molecule protects. And so the plant produced more of it. It pumped the bitter compound into its most valuable assets, the new leaves, the seedlings, the beans that held the future of the species. It was a strategy of ruthless efficiency. The bitterness itself was a warning signal, a taste that said to the grazing world, "Do not touch. I am not food. I am danger." For millions of years, this was the sole purpose of caffeine. It was a poison, a barrier between the green life of the plant and the hungry mouth of the predator. It existed in the dark silence of the jungle, doing its work unseen. It flowed through the veins of the leaves like a silent sentinel, standing guard over the slow, photosynthetic labor of the shrub. But nature is a weaver of complex tapestries, and it rarely allows a tool to have only one purpose. As the eons dragged on, a strange and poetic inversion began to take place. The dynamic of the forest is not just about war, it is also about cooperation. The plant needed protection from the leaf-eaters, yes, but it also needed the help of the pollinators. It needed the bees, the moths, and the flies to carry its pollen from one bloom to another to ensure the continuation of its line. The flower of the coffee plant and the flower of the citrus and the tea bush evolved to be beautiful. They produced white, star-shaped blossoms with a heavy, intoxicating perfume siren song of scent drifting through the humid air. They produced nectar, a sugary reward to entice the flying messengers. But here the genius of the plant revealed itself in a twist of evolutionary irony. It began to lace this sweet nectar with a tiny, trace amount of its bitter weapon. Why would a plant poison its own partner? Why introduce a toxin into the gift meant for the bee? The answer lies in the neurology of the bee, which, in a fundamental way, echoes our own. In high doses, caffeine was deadly to the grazer. But in low doses, consumed by the pollinator, it was not a poison. It was a stimulant. Picture the honeybee of the ancient world, navigating the chaotic green labyrinth of the jungle. It is searching for food, its tiny brain processing a kaleidoscope of scents and colors. It lands on the coffee flower. It drinks the nectar, and as it drinks, the caffeine molecules slip into its system. They do not paralyze, they electrify. The effect on the bee is profound. The caffeine triggers a cascade of reactions in the insect's brain. It sharpens the memory. It etches the location of the flower into the bee's mind with an indelible clarity. The scent of the blossom becomes hyper-real, associated with a powerful, rewarding kick. The bee feels a surge of energy, a clarity of purpose. It lifts off, buzzing with a newfound vigor, and it remembers. It remembers the shape of the petals. It remembers the precise coordinates of the shrub. The plant had learned to hack the mind of the animal. By offering a low dose of this psychoactive compound, the plant ensured that the bee would not just visit, but return. It created a faithful customer. The bee, influenced by the caffeine, would bypass other flowers, ignoring the bland offerings of non-caffeinated competitors to seek out the specific buzz of the caffeine producers. It was a manipulation of exquisite subtlety. The plant was not just providing food, it was providing a pharmacological experience. It was binding the pollinator to it with the invisible chains of chemistry. This was the first coffee break in history, occurring millions of years before a human being ever poured a cup. It happened in the sun-drenched canopy between a flower and a fly. The plant was the master, the insect the servant, and the molecule the tether that bound them together. Consider the sheer improbability of this. This molecule, C8H10N4O2, is not a simple structure. It requires energy and complex enzymes to build. Yet, it was so effective that it did not just evolve once. It appeared in the cacao trees of South America. It appeared in the tea bushes of East Asia. It appeared in the cola nuts of West Africa. Separated by vast oceans, separated by continents drifting slowly apart on plates of molten rock, these disparate plants all stumbled upon the same secret. This is what scientists call convergent evolution, when nature solves the same problem with the same solution in different places and times. It is as if the Earth itself wanted this molecule to exist, as if there was a destiny waiting in the soil, demanding to be unlocked. So, the world turned. The Eocene gave way to the Oligocene. The jungles retreated as the planet cooled. Grasslands spread across the continents like a golden tide. The mammals grew larger, emerging from the shadows of the dinosaurs to claim the earth. And through it all, the caffeine plants waited. They grew in the understory of the Ethiopian highlands. They flourished in the misty valleys of the Himalayas. They thrived in the Amazonian basin. They were waiting for a nervous system complex enough to truly appreciate what they had to offer. The insect brain was a simple lock for the caffeine key. It could be stimulated, yes, and its memory enhanced. But the insect could not reflect. It could not create art or philosophy or industry. It could not stay awake at night to ponder the stars or the nature of its own soul. For the full potential of this molecule to be realized, it needed a new host. It needed a creature with a brain capable of fatigue, a creature that would burden itself with the weight of conscious thought. We must picture the long, lonely vigils of the plants. For millions of years, the red berries of the coffee shrub ripened, fell to the dark earth, and rotted, their secrets untasted by anyone but the birds and the beetles. The tea leaves withered on the branch, falling into the mountain streams to create steeping pools of golden water that no one drank. The potential energy of the Industrial Revolution, the Enlightenment, and the Information Age was locked inside these cellular prisons, dormant, silent, unobserved. The wind rustled through the glossy leaves. The rain fell. The seasons cycled with a rhythmic indifference. The plants perfected their craft, refining the dosage, balancing the bitterness with the sweet, creating a chemical cocktail of immense power. They were the silent guardians of the canopy, holding a treasure that the world was not yet ready to receive. It is a humbling thought, as we lie in the comfort of our modern lives, to realize how ancient this relationship is. Before we were human, before we walked upright, before we learned to carry fire, the chemistry of our wakefulness was already waiting for us. It was synthesized in the slow green laboratory of the prehistoric forest, refined by the appetites of slugs and the flight paths of bees. The story of caffeine is often told as a story of human discovery, of how we found the bean and tamed it. But in the long view of history, perhaps the opposite is true. Perhaps we did not find caffeine. Perhaps caffeine was waiting for us. Perhaps the plant, having conquered the insect mind, was simply waiting for a larger, more ambitious carrier to come along, a carrier that would take its seeds out of the jungle and spread them across the entire globe, planting them in neat rows in Brazil, in Vietnam, in Java, tending to them with obsession and care. But that era of global dominance was still far in the future. For now, in the deep time of our narrative, there is only the forest. Let us linger here for a moment longer, in the peace of the pre-human world. The sun sets over the Eocene jungle, painting the sky in bruises of purple and orange. The air cools. The great drone of the day shifts to the chirping chorus of the night. In the darkness, the coffee shrubs stand motionless. They are breathing, transpiring, moving water and nutrients through their veins. Inside the ripening cherries, the seeds are hardening. Inside the seeds, the molecules are locking into place. It is a peaceful, potent silence. It is the silence of a coiled spring. It is the silence of a loaded gun. Somewhere in the distance, in the branches of the evolving trees, the early primates are stirring. They are small, tree-dwelling creatures, feeding on fruits and insects, their eyes large and adapted for the dark. They are our ancestors. They do not know it yet, but they are living in the midst of a pharmacy. They are sleeping in the arms of a stimulant that will one day fuel their ascent to the moon. But for now, they sleep. The forest sleeps. The only thing that is truly awake, vibrating with a hidden atomic energy, is the molecule itself. It sits in the leaf, in the bean, in the bark. It is the crystallized essence of wakefulness, hidden in a world of slumber. And so, the stage is set. The chemistry is prepared. The weapon has been forged in the fires of evolution and tempered by the hunger of the pest. The lure has been sweetened for the pollinator. The trap is laid. All that is missing is the hand to pluck the fruit. All that is missing is the curiosity to taste the forbidden bitterness. All that is missing is the fire to roast the seed and release the ghost within. Long ages will pass. Continents will crash into one another, pushing up mountain ranges. Ice ages will come, burying the northern world in glaciers miles thick, and then retreat, leaving behind scarred valleys and new rivers. Species will rise and fall in the blinking of a geological eye, and through all the chaos and the churning of the earth, the silent guardian of the canopy remains. It endures. It waits. It waits for the goat herd. It waits for the monk. It waits for the steam engine and the laptop computer. It waits for you. But before the awakening, there must be the dream. And here, in the cradle of the ancient world, the dream of the caffeine molecule is just beginning. A dream of a world that never sleeps. A dream of a mind that never dims. A dream of a civilization powered by the heartbeat of a small, red berry. Let the mist roll in. Let the jungle breathe. The story has begun. The mist does not merely cover the Ethiopian highlands, it embraces them. It is a living, breathing entity, a soft gray ocean that drifts through the valleys of the rift, clinging to the jagged basalt cliffs and the emerald slopes of the mountains. To understand the birth of coffee, one must first surrender to this landscape. We are in the province of Kaffa, in the Horn of Africa, a place where the earth itself feels ancient, as if the geological clock has paused to catch its breath. The year is somewhere in the shrouded uncertainty of the 9th century. The world is vast, disconnected, and largely asleep. Europe is deep in the Dark Ages, a patchwork of muddy fiefdoms. The Maya civilization is collapsing into the jungle. But here, on the high plateaus of Abyssinia, the air is thin, crisp, and charged with a silent potential. The terrain here is dramatic, soaring testament to the violence of the Earth's crust. Volcanic soil, rich and dark as chocolate, nurtures a chaotic abundance of green. It is a world of vertical extremes, where the sun burns hot in the thin air, but the shade of the canopy remains eternally cool. In this high-altitude Eden, the seasons are measured not by snow and heat, but by the rhythm of the rains. It is a place of solitude, where the only sounds are the wind whistling through the gorges, the distant cry of a rock hyrax, and the gentle, rhythmic clatter of hooves on stone. Enter the protagonist of our legend, Kaldi. History, in its strictest sense, has no record of his birth or his death. He exists in the borderland between fact and folklore, a silhouette walking the ridgeline of our collective memory. He is a goat herder. His life is defined by the slow, repetitive cadence of the pastoral existence. Picture him, a figure wrapped in rough woven cloth, leaning on a weathered staff of acacia wood. His skin is weathered by the high-altitude sun, his eyes accustomed to reading the subtle signs of the weather and the mood of his flock. For Kaldi, time is not a line, but a circle. The sun rises, the goats graze, the sun sets, the goats sleep. There is a heavy, hypnotic monotony to this life. In the afternoons, when the equatorial sun is at its zenith, a profound drowsiness settles over the mountains. The heat shimmers off the rocks. The insects buzz with a lazy, hypnotic drone. It is the hour of the nap, the time when biology demands rest. Kaldi, sitting in the shade of a sycamore, fights the heaviness of his own eyelids. The fatigue of the shepherd is a deep, bone-weary sensation, a dull gray fog that slows the mind and blunts the senses. This was the natural state of humanity for most of our existence, governed by the sun, ruled by the circadian rhythm, bound to the cycle of waking and sleeping. But on this particular day, the rhythm was broken. Kaldi's gaze, drifting half-lidded over the valley, settled on his goats. Usually at this hour, the animals would be huddled in the shade, chewing their cud in a state of semi-comatose contentment. But today, they were not resting. They were dancing. It began with a single old buck, a creature usually known for his stoic lethargy. He was rearing up on his hind legs, bleating with a strange, frantic enthusiasm. Then a nanny goat joined him, leaping over a fallen log with the agility of a gazelle. Soon, the entire flock was caught in a wave of inexplicable energy. They butted heads in play. They pirouetted on the steep slopes. Their bells chimed in a chaotic, jagged symphony that shattered the afternoon silence. Kaldi rubbed his eyes, certain that the heat was playing tricks on his mind. He watched, bewildered, as the animals moved with a vibrating intensity, a frenetic, joyous energy that seemed to defy the very laws of nature. They were possessed. They had broken the contract of the afternoon slump. Curiosity, that most human of traits, overcame his fear. The shepherd pushed himself up from his resting place and descended the slope toward the herd. As he drew closer, he saw what they were eating. The goats were stripping the leaves and fruit from a cluster of glossy, dark green shrubs that grew wild in the understory of the forest. The shrubs were laden with berries bright crimson cherries that gleamed like polished rubies against the dark foliage. These were the berries of the Coffea arabica, the descendant of that Eocene guardian we spoke of in the deep past. For millions of years, the plant had been waiting in these hills, its chemical payload refined by evolution. The goats, driven by instinct, or perhaps by the sheer boredom of their diet, had unlocked the safe. Kaldi stood before the bush. He hesitated. In the ancient world, to eat unknown fruit was a gamble with death. Nature is filled with poisons, with berries that stop the heart or close the throat. But he looked at the goats. They were not dying. They were more alive than he had ever seen them. They were vibrating with vitality. The temptation was too great. The contrast between his own sluggish fatigue and their electric joy was unbearable. With a trembling hand, the shepherd reached out. He plucked a single red cherry. It was smooth and cool to the touch. He placed it in his mouth. The first sensation was sweetness, a thin layer of sugary mucilage beneath the skin. Pleasant, but unremarkable. He bit down. The seed inside was hard, yielding with a crunch. And then came the taste, bitter, astringent, earthy. He chewed, swallowing the juice and the crushed seed. He waited. At first, nothing happened. The wind continued to blow. The goats continued to caper. But then, slowly, subtly, the internal landscape began to shift. It started as a tingling in the extremities, a slight quickening of the pulse. The heart, that drum of the body, began to beat with a stronger, more assertive rhythm. The blood began to pump faster, flushing the capillaries, and then the fog lifted. It is difficult to overstate the profundity of this moment. For a pre-modern human, true wakefulness was a rare commodity. The mind was usually clouded by labor, by poor nutrition, by the relentless cycle of exhaustion. But as the caffeine molecule crossed the blood-brain barrier, it began to dock with the adenosine receptors in Kaldi's brain. Adenosine is the chemical of tiredness. It accumulates throughout the day, telling the body to slow down, to rest, to sleep. The caffeine blocked this signal. It threw a wrench into the gears of fatigue. Suddenly, Kaldi's vision sharpened. The green of the valley became more vivid, more saturated. The edges of the clouds looked crisp, as if drawn with a fine pen. The sound of the goat bells was no longer a noise, but a music, distinct, individual notes ringing in the clear air. His thoughts, usually slow and plodding, began to race. Ideas connected with lightning speed. The weariness in his legs evaporated, replaced by a hum of potential energy. The legend says that Kaldi began to dance with his goats. Picture it. The lone human figure on the vast, empty hillside, twirling under the African sun, laughing with the sheer, unadulterated joy of being awake. He felt like a god. He had consumed the fruit of the earth and been granted a power usually reserved for the spirits, the power to conquer sleep. But this energy was too great to keep to himself. It was a revelation, and revelations must be shared. As the sun began to dip toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and gold, Kaldi gathered his energized flock. He filled his pockets with the red cherries, the magic fruit, and set off toward the nearest outpost of civilization. He was headed for a monastery. Ethiopia has one of the oldest Christian traditions in the world, a faith rooted in the solitude of the desert and the mountains. The local monastery was a place of stone and silence, a fortress of the soul built against the chaos of the world. The monks who lived there were men of discipline. Their lives were a rigorous cycle of prayer, fasting, and labor. They sought to transcend the flesh, to keep their minds fixed on the divine. But they were also men. They suffered from the same biology as the shepherd. They fought the same battles against heavy eyelids during the long, chanting liturgies of the night. Kaldi arrived at the heavy wooden gates as twilight deepened. He was breathless, his eyes wide and shining with the lingering effects of the stimulant. He demanded to see the abbot, the head of the order. The meeting took place in the courtyard, by the light of flickering torches. Kaldi poured the red berries onto a table. He spoke rapidly, his words tumbling over one another as he described the dancing goats, the strange energy, the lifting of the fog. He offered the fruit to the abbot as a gift, a miracle from the wild. The abbot, a man of severe countenance and deep learning, looked at the berries with suspicion. He looked at the manic energy of the shepherd. To the medieval religious mind, any sudden alteration of the consciousness was suspect. Joy that did not come from prayer was likely a deception. Energy that defied the natural order was presumed to be of dark origin. "This is the work of the devil," the abbot declared, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "These are berries of madness." He did not see a gift. He saw a temptation. He saw a loss of control. In a gesture of righteous rejection, the abbot swept the berries off the table and cast them into the fire that burned in the center of the courtyard. It was intended to be an act of destruction. It was meant to purify the monastery of this pagan influence. The berries fell into the glowing embers. The fire licked at the fruit. The moisture in the pulp hissed and evaporated. The skins blackened and curled. But then, the chemistry shifted. As the heat penetrated the hard green seeds within the fruit, the Maillard reaction began. Complex sugars and amino acids began to interact under the thermal stress. The cellular structure of the bean broke down, releasing volatile oils. The serendipitous alchemy of the roasting process had begun. The smoke that rose from the fire did not smell like burning refuse. It did not smell like wood smoke. It carried a scent that had never existed on Earth before that moment. It was a plume of heavy, complex perfuminotes of dark chocolate, caramelized sugar, toasted nuts, and a deep, earthbound floral aroma. It was a smell that bypassed the logical brain and went straight to the seat of desire. The monks, who had been standing back in fear, stepped forward. They sniffed the air. The abbot paused in his condemnation. The aroma was not sulphurous or evil. It was rich. It was inviting. It smelled, strangely, like comfort. It smelled like home. The scent filled the stone chamber, drifting into the sanctuary, wrapping itself around the pillars. It was seductive and undeniable. The sheer olfactory power of roasting coffee broke through the dogma. The monks realized with a collective intuition that something that smelled this divine could not be wholly evil. Curiosity replaced fear. One of the young novices, perhaps braver or more reckless than the others, raked the blackened beans out of the fire. They were hot, brittle, and aromatic. The water in the great iron kettle was boiling. Following an instinct that has guided humans since the discovery of fire, they decided to combine the two. They crushed the roasted beans, cracking the hulls to release the inner oils, and threw the coarse powder into the boiling water. The water turned dark, absorbing the essence of the seed. It became a black liquor, opaque and steaming. They poured the liquid into cups. It was hot, bitter, and strong. The abbot, perhaps realizing that the test of the pudding is in the eating, took the first sip. The bitterness was shocking at first, a slap to the palate, but beneath the bitter was the warmth. And then, moments later, came the kick. The same clarity that had visited Kaldi on the hillside now visited the abbot in the courtyard. The fatigue of the day washed away, his mind sharpened. The heavy burden of his age seemed to lighten. He looked at his brethren, his eyes clear and alert. He realized the utility of this discovery immediately. "This," he might have whispered, "is not the work of the devil. This is a tool for the Lord." That night, for the first time in the history of the monastery, the Midnight Vigil was different. Usually the monks struggled to stay upright during the long hours of chanting that stretched from midnight until dawn. Heads would nod, voices would trail off. The spirit was willing, but the flesh was weak. But on this night, the choir was full-throated. The monks stood erect, their eyes bright in the candlelight. The prayers rose with a new vigor, fueled by the black brew. They had found a way to cheat the body's demand for sleep. They had found a way to extend the hours of devotion. They had unlocked the midnight sun of the mind. The news of the sacred brew did not stay within the walls of the monastery. It is the nature of such secrets to leak. Word traveled from the highlands to the valleys, from the solitary hermitages to the bustling trading posts. The berries were carried in leather pouches, traded for salt and gold. The knowledge of how to roast them, how to transform the raw, grassy seed into the dark, aromatic bean, began to spread. It is here, in the cool, mist-shrouded highlands of Ethiopia, that the culture of coffee was born. It was not yet the commodity of the stock market. It was not yet the fuel of the industrial worker. It was a religious sacrament, a medicine for the soul, a dark, warm companion for the solitary thinker in the middle of the night. Imagine the scene as the chapter closes. The monastery sits quiet on the cliff edge, the moonlight washing over its stone walls. Inside, the monks are chanting, their voices harmonizing with the wind. In the corner, a pot of coffee sits on the coals, keeping warm. The scent of the roast mingles with the scent of frankincense. Far away, on the hillside, Kaldi sleeps by his fire, his goats resting around him. He dreams, perhaps, of the dancing herd. He does not know that he has changed the world. He does not know that the red berry he plucked will one day power the revolutions of empires, the writing of symphonies, and the waking of billions. He only knows that the fog has lifted, and for the first time, humanity has found a way to light a candle inside the mind, pushing back the darkness of sleep. The red berry has been harvested, the fire has been lit, the aroma has been released. The genie is out of the bottle, and it will never go back in. And so, the berry begins its journey. It will leave the high purity of the mountains. It will travel down the caravan routes. It will cross the Red Sea. It is moving toward the east, toward the rising sun, toward a new destiny in the hands of the mystics. The mist rolls on, but the world is no longer quite as asleep as it was before. We must now leave the scorching, sun-drenched highlands of Ethiopia. We must leave the red volcanic earth and the frantic, dancing energy of the goatherd behind. Let the trade winds carry us eastward, lifting us over the expanse of the Indian Ocean, drifting across the vastness of the Asian continent, until we descend into a landscape of entirely different hues. The red and black of Africa fade into a world of infinite, misty greens. We are entering the cradle of the East. We are entering the silent, cloud-wrapped mountains of ancient China. It is a time before the counting of years as we know them. It is the mythical dawn of civilization, nearly 5,000 years ago, around 2737 BCE. The world here feels older, wetter, and softer. It is a landscape of limestone karsts rising like dragon's teeth from the valleys, of bamboo forests swaying in the damp breeze, and of great rivers winding their way to the sea like serpents of liquid silver. Here, the silence is not the heavy, hot silence of the savannah, but a cool, damp quiet, broken only by the dripping of water from mossy stones and the distant call of the crane. In this verdant world, a figure sits beneath the shelter of a wild tree. It is the Emperor Shennong. To understand the birth of tea, we must understand this man. In the blurred archives of mythology, Shennong is known as the divine farmer. He is the father of agriculture, the sage who taught the people how to plow the earth and sow the grain. But he was also the first great scientist, a botanical explorer who roamed the wilderness testing the properties of every plant, root, and leaf. Legend says he had a transparent stomach, allowing him to see the effects of the herbs he ingested, to watch as they healed or harmed his internal organs. He was a man driven by a profound, sacrificial curiosity, risking his life with every bite to map the pharmacology of the natural world. On this particular day, the emperor is weary. He has been walking for hours through the high mountain forests, cataloging the flora. He is resting now, sitting with his back against the trunk of a Camellia sinensis tree, though it does not yet have a name. He is a man of hygiene and discipline. He has decreed that all water must be boiled before drinking, a prescient understanding of purity that separated his people from the dangers of the raw world. His servant has built a small fire. A bronze cauldron sits atop the flames, filled with water drawn from a nearby mountain stream. The water begins to heat. The surface trembles. Steam rises, curling into the humid air, joining the mist that clings to the canopy. And then, the accident happens. The wind sighs through the branches above. A few dried leaves detached from the tree by the breeze drift downward. They spiral through the air in a slow, silent dance. They do not land on the ground. They land in the boiling water. Shennong watches. He does not skim them out. He is a man who observes nature's interruptions. He watches as the leaves begin to unfurl in the heat. They rehydrate, expanding, releasing their essence into the liquid. The water changes color. It shifts from clear transparency to a pale, translucent golden-yellow-green hue that catches the light of the fire. A scent rises from the cauldron. It is not the heavy chocolate earth punch of the roasting coffee bean. It is something else entirely. It is fresh, vegetal, and clean. It smells of rain, of cut grass, of the forest floor, and of flowers. It is a scent that cleanses the lungs. Intrigued, the divine farmer lifts the cup to his lips. He takes a sip. The taste is complex. There is a slight bitterness, yes, the signature of the protective alkaloids. But it is immediately followed by a lingering sweetness, a sensation the Chinese call hui gan, the returning flavor. It is astringent, drying the tongue, yet refreshing. But it is what happens next that marks the true discovery. As the liquid moves through his system, Shennong does not feel the jolting, electric kick that Kaldi felt. He does not want to dance. Instead, he feels a sensation of clearing. The ancient texts claim that as the tea hit his stomach, he felt it investigating every part of his body, searching out toxins and flushing them away. Mentally, the effect is subtle and profound. The fog of his fatigue does not burn off, it dissolves. A gentle clarity settles over his mind. His thoughts do not race, they align. He feels alert, yet completely at ease. The tension in his shoulders releases. The world seems to slow down, becoming more manageable, more beautiful. He has found a beverage that does not excite the body into a frenzy, but rather tunes the mind to a perfect, resonant pitch. Tea, he is said to have declared, gives vigor to the body, contentment to the mind, and determination of purpose. Thus, the second great vessel for the caffeine molecule was unlocked. But this was a different expression of the same chemical soul. In the coffee bean, caffeine is the loud, solitary protagonist, but in the tea leaf, the molecule is never alone. It is accompanied by a partner, a rare amino acid known as L-theanine. We must pause to appreciate this chemical ballet. L-theanine is found almost exclusively in the tea plant. It is a compound that crosses the blood-brain barrier and increases the production of alpha waves, the electrical signals associated with a state of relaxed wakefulness. It is the brain state of the daydreamer, the artist in the flow, the meditator in deep contemplation. When caffeine and L-theanine enter the body together, they create a synergy that is unique in the natural world. The L-theanine smooths out the rough edges of the caffeine. It dampens the jitteriness, the anxiety, the rush. It transforms the spike of energy into a plateau, a long, sustained hum of focus. If coffee is the blaring trumpet of the morning, waking the soldiers for war, tea is the flute, playing a melody that invites the scholar to think. For centuries after Shennong's discovery, this emerald infusion remained a medicine. It was a bitter soup, often mixed with ginger, onion, and orange peel, consumed to cure headaches or purge poisons. It was a utility, a tool of the herbalist. But slowly, as the dynasties rose and fell, as the Han gave way to the chaotic brilliance of the Three Kingdoms, and eventually to the golden age of the Tang, tea began to shed its medical robes. It began to put on the silk of high culture. We move now to the 8th century, to the glittering era of the Tang dynasty. This is a time when China is the center of the world, a civilization of immense sophistication, poetry, and art. The capital, Chang'an, is the largest city on earth, a metropolis of 2 million people where silk merchants, poets, and courtiers mingle in the boulevards. And here, amidst the pagodas and the willow trees, a man named Lu Yu is born. He is an orphan, raised in a Buddhist monastery, a man who will dedicate his entire life to a single subject. He is the first tea master. He will write the Cha Jing, the classic of tea, the first definitive book on the subject. Lu Yu treats tea not as a drink, but as a religion. In his writing, he codifies the universe of the leaf. He describes the soil where it must be grown. Rich and rocky is best. He describes the water. Water from the slow-moving mountain stream is superior. Well water is inferior. He describes the fire. It must be lively and clear. Under Lu Yu's guidance, tea becomes an aesthetic experience. It is no longer a soup of vegetables. It is a pure infusion. He teaches the people to powder the leaves, to whisk them into a froth, to drink from bowls of blue-glazed porcelain that enhance the green color of the liquid. He elevates the act of drinking to a performance of grace and mindfulness. Tea tempers the spirits and harmonizes the mind, Lu Yu wrote. It dispels lassitude and relieves fatigue, awakens thought and prevents drowsiness. The drink began to permeate the social fabric of the empire. Tea houses sprang up in the cities, places of music and conversation. But its deepest roots, its most profound connection, remained in the mountains, within the walls of the temples. This brings us to the Midnight Vigil of the East. Just as the Sufi monks in Yemen used coffee to fuel their prayers, the Buddhist monks of China used tea to fuel their meditation. Picture a Zen monastery, or Chan, as it was known then, perched high on a misty peak in the Wuyi Mountains. It is winter. The snow lies thick on the curved, tiled roofs. The air is biting cold. Inside the meditation hall, the monks sit in rows on raised platforms. They are practicing zazen-seated meditation. The goal of zazen is a state of alert stillness. The body must be motionless as a rock, the spine erect, the breath slow and deep. The mind must be empty of clutter, yet vividly awake, watching the thoughts pass like clouds in a sky. It is a state of extreme difficulty. The human mind rebels against the silence. It seeks distraction. And the human body, sitting in the warm, incense-filled dark, naturally drifts toward sleep. The demon of sleep is the great enemy of the meditator. The heavy eyelids, the nodding head, the slump of the spin. These are the failures of the practice. And so, tea became the essential tool of the Dharma. Before the long sessions of sitting, the monks would gather for a ritual drinking of the green elixir. They would drink from large communal bowls, passing the vessel from hand to hand in silence. The warm liquid would descend, warming the core. The caffeine would gently engage the nervous system, banishing the drowsiness. The L-theanine would calm the restless monkey mind, smoothing out the anxiety of trying to meditate. The result was a state of perfect poise. The monks could sit for hours, eyes half open, gazing at the floor, their minds bright and clear as a polished mirror, reflecting the void. There is a famous legend from this time, a story of Bodhidharma, the Indian sage who brought Zen to China. It is said that he was so furious with himself for falling asleep during meditation that he cut off his own eyelids and threw them to the ground. Where his bloody eyelids landed, the first tea bushes sprang up, plants born from the desire to keep the eyes open. It is a visceral, violent myth, but it speaks to the intensity of the relationship between the plant and the pursuit of enlightenment. Tea became liquid jade, a bridge between the physical world and the spiritual void. It was said that the taste of tea and the taste of Zen are one and the same. To drink tea was to participate in the nature of reality, bitter, sweet, hot, fleeting. As the Tang dynasty gave way to the Song, the refinement of tea reached its zenith. This was the era of the whipped tea, the precursor to the matcha we know today. The leaves were steamed, dried, and ground into a microscopic emerald powder. Imagine the scene in the Emperor Huizong's palace in the 12th century. The emperor himself was a tea fanatic, writing his own treatise on the subject. In the royal pavilions, overlooking gardens of meticulously placed rocks and raked sand, the preparation of tea was a high art. The powdered tea was placed in a black glazed bowl, the dark color chosen to contrast with the white foam. Boiling water was added. Then, using a whisk carved from a single piece of bamboo, the tea master would beat the mixture. The goal was to create a thick, creamy froth, a landscape of foam that would cling to the sides of the bowl. This was not a quick drink. It was a meditation in motion. The sound of the whisk against the ceramic, ch-ch-ch, was the only sound in the room. The steam rose. The aroma of fresh vegetation filled the pavilion. The resulting beverage was a suspension of the leaf itself, a potent, concentrated shot of chlorophyll and consciousness. To drink this was to ingest the landscape. The drinker was consuming the sunlight that had fallen on the hillside, the rain that had watered the roots, the mist that had shrouded the leaves. They were drinking the mountain itself. And outside the palaces and the temples, the landscape of China was being transformed by this demand. The emerald mist was spreading. Whole provinces were turned over to the cultivation of the bush. Terraced hillsides, carved like giant staircases into the mountains, rippled with rows of green. Picture the harvest, a scene that has remained unchanged for millennia. It is early spring, the time of the pre-Qingming harvest, when the buds are most tender. The hills are shrouded in the morning fog. The tea pickers, often women with bamboo baskets strapped to their backs, move through the rows. Their hands move with the speed of birds, plucking only the 2 leaves and a bud, the newest growth where the plant has concentrated its energy and its flavor. It is a silent, rhythmic labor. The only sound is the snap of the stems and the rustle of the leaves. These women are the harvesters of wakefulness. They are gathering the raw material of philosophy, the fuel of poetry. Every leaf they touch will eventually end up in a cup, traveling down the Yangtze on wooden barges, carried by horses along the Tea-Horse Road into Tibet, and eventually loaded onto great junk ships to sail across the seas. The molecule was on the move. It had conquered the East. It had created a civilization defined by patience, by the appreciation of subtle flavors, by the ability to sit still and observe the world. While Europe was still drinking weak ale and wine, muddling through a haze of mild intoxication, China was wide awake. The scholars were writing thousands of poems celebrating the clarity tea brought to their work. The painters were creating landscapes of towering mountains and tiny philosophers, fueled by the green tea that allowed them to visualize the vastness of nature. "The first cup moistens my lips and throat," wrote the Tang poet Lu Tong in his famous 7 Cups of Tea. "The second cup breaks my loneliness. The third cup searches my barren entrails but to find therein some 5,000 scrolls. The fourth cup raises a slight perspiration. All the wrong of life passes away through my pores. At the 5th cup, I am purified. The 6th cup calls me to the realms of the immortals. The 7th cup, but I could take no more. I only feel the breath of cool wind that rises in my sleeves. This was the gift of the silent guardian of the canopy to the people of the dragon. It was a gift of ascent. It lifted the human spirit out of the mud of exhaustion and the dust of the mundane, raising it, cup by cup, toward the clear, cold air of the immortals. But the story of the molecule is a story of movement. It cannot be contained by one culture or one continent. Just as the coffee bean was restless in Africa, the tea leaf was restless in China. The ships were being built. The trade routes were opening. The emerald mist was about to drift westward to meet its dark brother from Ethiopia, and together they would change the rhythm of the entire world. But that is a chapter for the future. For now, let us rest in the Song dynasty. Let us sit in the pavilion, listening to the rain fall on the tiled roof. The bowl is warm in our hands. The foam is bright green. The steam rises, vanishing into the air like a thought. The mind is clear. The body is still. The silence is perfect. This is the empire of tea. The journey of the molecule now shifts from the mist-shrouded peaks of the east and the wild highlands of Africa to a landscape of starker, more elemental beauty. We must cross the water. We must follow the trade winds that blow across the Red Sea, that narrow, treacherous ribbon of salt water that separates the African continent from the Arabian Peninsula. For centuries, this sea was a barrier, a watery divide between worlds, but it was also a bridge. Dhows, those ancient wooden vessels with their triangular lateen sails, cut through the turquoise waters, their hulls creaking under the weight of ivory, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And somewhere in the 15th century, amidst the sacks of spices and the bales of silk, there lay the sacks of the strange, hard, green berries from Ethiopia. The bean was leaving its cradle. It was crossing into the world of Islam. It was about to shed its identity as a tribal secret and assume a new name, a new purpose, and a new sacred geometry. We arrive at the port of Mocha on the coast of Yemen. Even the name evokes a sensory memory, chocolate, depth, richness. But in the 1400s, Mocha was a bustling, chaotic gateway, a city of white stone bleaching under the relentless Arabian sun. The air here was thick with the smell of salt and the dry, dusty heat of the desert interior. It was here that the Sufi mystics, the spiritual seekers of Islam, first embraced the dark brew. To understand this moment in history, we must understand the geography of the soul as much as the geography of the land. The Sufis were the mystics of the faith, men who sought a direct personal experience of the divine. They were not content with mere ritual. They sought ecstasy. They sought fana, the annihilation of the self in the presence of God. Their practice was rigorous. It required long, grueling nights of prayer, chanting, and meditation known as dhikr, the remembrance. They would gather in the zawiyas and tekis, the spiritual lodges, to recite the names of Allah thousands of times, to sway in rhythm, to control the breath until the mind transcended the body. But the body is a stubborn vessel. It is made of clay and water. It grows heavy. It yearns for sleep. The Midnight Vigil was a battle against the crushing weight of biology. The eyelids would droop, the head would nod, and the connection to the divine would be severed by the fog of fatigue. It is said that the Sheikh Ash-Shadili, a great Sufi master, was traveling in Ethiopia when he encountered the energized goats and the stimulating berries. Or perhaps it was his disciple, who, weary and ill in the desert, chewed the berries and found the strength to return home. The legends blur, as they always do, into the golden haze of myth. But what is certain is that by the mid-15th century, the Sufis of Yemen had adopted the drink as a sacrament. They called it kawa. The word itself is a poetic shapeshifter. In the ancient Arabic lexicon, kawa originally referred to a type of wine-a-drink that dulls the appetite and clouds the mind. But the mystics repurposed the word. They took a term for intoxication and applied it to a drink of clarity. This was the wine of Araby, but it was a wine that did not make one drunk. It made one hyper-aware. It was the anti-wine. Where alcohol blurred the edges of reality, coffee sharpened them. Where alcohol led to slumber, coffee led to vigilance. Picture the scene in a Yemeni Sufi lodge in the deep quiet of the year 1450. The sun has long since set behind the jagged mountains. The air is cool and smells of dust and jasmine. Inside the courtyard, the only light comes from the flickering oil lamps and the stars wheeling overhead in the obsidian sky. The dervishes are gathering. They are dressed in rough wool, their faces illuminated by the fire. In the center of the circle sits the coffee maker, the keeper of the brew. The preparation is not hurried. It is a liturgy in itself. The beans, imported from the highlands across the sea, are roasted in a perforated metal pan over the charcoal. The sound of the beans cracking snap, snap is the opening note of the ceremony. The smoke rises, thick and incense-like, carrying that familiar grounding aroma of earth and fire. Then, the grinding. The roasted beans are placed in a wooden mortar. The pestle rises and falls thump, thump, thump. It is a rhythmic, hypnotic sound, a percussion that mimics the heartbeat, a drum summoning the spirit of the plant. The powder is boiled in water, perhaps with a pod of cardamom or a pinch of cinnamon, until it rises in a dark, frothing tide. The cup is passed. It is small, handleless, made of clay or porcelain. The liquid is black as the night outside. It is scalding hot. The dervish sips. Trace the molecule again. It enters the bloodstream, racing to the brain. It blocks the adenosine. But here, in this context, the chemical reaction is given a spiritual meaning. The sudden alertness that floods the mind is interpreted as a gift from God, a removal of the veil between the human and the divine. The markaha, the coffee euphoria, begins to take hold. With the caffeine pulsing in their veins, the chanting begins. Allah, Allah, Allah. The bodies begin to sway, the rhythm accelerates. The fatigue that usually claims the human animal at 2 a.m. is banished. The eyes remain wide, staring into the infinite. The dervishes spin, their robes flaring out like the rings of a planet, turning around the axis of their devotion. Coffee was the fuel of this ecstasy. It allowed the mystic to transcend the circadian rhythm, to conquer the limitations of the flesh, to turn the night into a time of active, burning worship. For the first time, human beings were systematically using a psychoactive substance not to escape reality, but to intensify it. They were drinking the darkness to find the light. But a substance this powerful could not remain locked behind the walls of the monastery forever. The energy of the bean is expansive. It wants to move. It wants to be shared. Slowly, the secrets seeped out of the Sufi lodges. Travelers, pilgrims, and merchants who tasted the brew during the religious ceremonies found that it had practical applications for the secular world as well. If it could keep a monk awake for prayer, it could keep a sentry awake for his watch. It could keep a scholar awake for his studies. It could keep a merchant awake to count his coin. By the early 16th century, the drink had reached the holy city of Mecca, and here, in the shadow of the Kaaba, the social potential of caffeine was truly unlocked. We witnessed the birth of a new kind of space, the Kave Kanesthe coffee houses. Before this moment, public social life in the ancient world was limited. Men gathered in the mosque, but that was a place of solemnity and prayer. They gathered in the bathhouse, but that was a place of cleansing. They gathered in the tavern, but that was a place of vice and inebriation, forbidden to the pious Muslim. There was no neutral ground, no secular sanctuary where a man could simply sit, sip, and think. The coffee house filled this void. Imagine walking through the winding, narrow streets of 1511 Mecca. The heat of the day is broken. The streets are alive with the murmur of 1,000 languages pilgrims from Persia, from Turkey, from North Africa, from India. You turn a corner and see a warm, yellow light spilling from a doorway. You hear the clatter of porcelain and the low, steady hum of conversation. You step inside. The air is thick with steam and smoke from the water pipes. Persian carpets cover the floor and the raised benches that line the walls. Brass lamps hang from the ceiling, casting intricate shadows. And everywhere there are men sitting with small cups of the black brew. This was a radical space. In the strict hierarchy of the time, rank was everything. But in the coffee house, the structure began to dissolve. For the price of a penny, anyone could enter. The wealthy merchant sat next to the poor poet. The scholar debated with the soldier. The distinctions of class were softened by the steam of the coffee. They played chess and backgammon, games of strategy that required a sharp mind, games that were perfectly suited to the caffeinated brain. They listened to storytellers reciting the epics of Antar and the romances of the desert. But most importantly, they talked. Under the influence of the bean, the tongue is loosened but not slurred. The mind is quickened. Arguments become more intricate. Ideas become more fluid. The coffee houses became known as schools of the wise. They were the first true public sphere, the internet of the 16th century. News traveled here faster than anywhere else. If a sultan died, if a war began, if a ship arrived, the coffee house knew it first. It was a nocturnal revolution. For thousands of years, the night had been the domain of the wolf, the thief, and the sleeper. Honest men went to bed with the sun. To be up at night was to be suspect. But coffee pushed back the boundaries of the day. It carved out a new territory in time. It allowed civilization to extend its operating hours. But with this new alertness came a new danger. Authorities have always been suspicious of people who stay up late talking. A sleepy population is easy to rule. A wakeful, hyperactive, debating population is unpredictable. In Mecca, in the year 1511, a dramatic scene unfolded that would be repeated in cities across the world for centuries to come. The governor of Mecca, a man named Khair Beg, was walking home one night when he saw a group of men huddled in a corner of the mosque compound, drinking coffee and passing a lantern. He thought they were drinking wine. When he investigated and found it was kahwa, he was deeply disturbed. He saw the energy, the intensity, the potential for sedition. He convened a council of jurists and doctors. He put coffee on trial. Picture the courtroom scene. The jar of coffee beans sitting in the center like a criminal defendant. The witnesses testifying that the drink caused dryness and melancholy, that it incited people to lewd behavior. The governor argued that it was an intoxicant and, therefore, haram, forbidden by the Quran. For a brief moment, coffee was banned. The sacks of beans were burned in the streets of Mecca. The coffee houses were boarded up. The scent of roasted coffee was replaced by the smell of suppression. But you cannot ban wakefulness. You cannot legislate against energy. The ban was doomed to fail. The Sultan in Cairo, a man who loved his coffee, overturned the decree. He reprimanded the governor, declaring that a drink that allowed the faithful to praise God with more vigor could not be evil. The coffee houses reopened. The brass pots were put back on the fire, and the wine of Araby continued its conquest. From Mecca, it traveled to Cairo, the great metropolis of the medieval world. Here, the coffee culture exploded. There were thousands of coffee houses. They became the living rooms of the city. The sheer volume of caffeine being consumed was staggering. It was fueling the intellectual golden age of the Mamluk Empire. Then, the Ottoman Turks swept down from the north. They conquered Egypt in 1517, but in conquering the land, they were conquered by the drink. The Turkish soldiers and bureaucrats fell in love with the dark brew. They took it back to Constantinople, Istanbul, the center of the world. And there, on the shores of the Bosphorus, coffee reached its opulent zenith. The Ottomans refined the brewing process. They built coffee houses that were like palaces, with fountains and musicians. They created a culture where a woman could legally divorce her husband if he failed to provide her with her daily quota of coffee. But let us remain for a moment longer in the Arabian night. The caravan is preparing to leave. The camels are loaded. The stars are wheeling toward the dawn. The Sufi master finishes his cup. He stands up, his limbs light, his mind a burning flame of attention. He begins to spin again, a white moth circling the divine light. He does not know that the liquid in his veins will one day fuel the French Revolution. He does not know it will power the Stock Exchange of London or the coding marathons of Silicon Valley. He only knows that, thanks to the dark gift of the earth, he is awake. He is witnessing the glory of the universe while the rest of the world sleeps. The molecule has found its second home. It has learned to speak Arabic. It has learned to pray. It has learned to argue. And now, it is looking north, toward the cold, gray continent of Europe. It is looking toward a people who are still drinking beer for breakfast, a people waiting to be jolted into the modern age. The midnight vigil is over. The dawn of the intellect is about to break. We must now leave the warm, star-drenched courtyards of Arabia. We must leave the scent of jasmine and cardamom behind and travel north into the chill and the damp. We cross the Mediterranean, traverse the Alps, and descend into the gray, misty archipelago of the British Isles. The year is 1650. The setting is London. The city is a labyrinth of timber and stone, huddled along the banks of the River Thames. The air is thick, not with the clean vapor of the mountains, but with the acrid sea coal smoke of 100,000 chimneys. The streets are narrow, slick with rain and refuse. It is a city on the cusp of greatness, yet it is a city that is, in a very literal sense, drunk. For centuries, the water of Europe had been a vector of death. To drink from a well or a river was to gamble with dysentery and cholera. And so, the wisdom of the ancestors dictated a simple solution: fermentation. The alcohol killed the pathogens. From the moment a child was weaned, they drank weak beer, ale, or watered-down wine. The average Londoner began their day with a morning draught of ale, consumed beer with lunch, and finished the day with more ale. Consider the physiological impact of this. For 1,000 years, the Western mind operated through a slight, perpetual haze. Alcohol is a depressant. It dulls the reflexes. It softens the edges of reality. It makes the world seem tolerable, but it does not make it sharp. The medieval consciousness was a drowsy one, a world of softened ambition and blurred lines. But then, a new barrel arrived at the docks. It came from the Ottoman Empire, brought by the Greek merchant Pasqua Rosé. It contained the blackened, roasted seeds we have followed from Ethiopia. When the first coffee house opened in St. Michael's Alley in 1652, it was not just a new business. It was a neurological shock to the system of the city. The black, bitter water, as the skeptics called it, was the antithesis of ale. It was hot, where beer was cold. It was dark, where beer was golden. It was bitter, where beer was sweet. But most importantly, it was sobering. The chemical transition that followed was profound. In the span of a few decades, the intake of London's thinking class shifted from a depressant to a stimulant. The collective brain of the city began to wake up. Imagine walking into one of these early establishments, perhaps the famous Turk's Head or Lloyd's. You push open the heavy wooden door and are hit by a wall of sensory information. The room is hazy with tobacco smoke, swirling in the light of tallow candles. The floor is covered in sawdust. The noise is a constant low roar of male voices. But listen closely to the conversation. They are not singing drunken ballads. They are not slurring their words in a tavern brawl. They are arguing. They are debating. They are reading. The coffee house was the great leveler of British society. For the price of a single penny, the admission fee, any man, be he a lord or a fishmonger, could enter. He could sit by the fire. He was given a ceramic bowl of the sobering liquor, and crucially, he had the right to engage anyone in conversation. This gave rise to the nickname the penny universities. For a penny, you could sit for hours and listen to the greatest minds of the age. You might find yourself sitting next to Christopher Wren, the architect who would rebuild London. You might overhear Robert Hooke discussing the nature of microscopic life. You might witness a heated debate about the divine right of kings or the motion of the planets. This was the Internet of the 17th century. Information did not travel by fiber optic cable. It traveled by caffeine. Runners, young boys known as devils, would dash between the coffee houses, carrying newsletters and pamphlets. The tables were piled high with broadsheets. If you wanted to know the shipping news, you went to Lloyd's Coffee House, which would, in time, evolve into the world's largest insurance market. If you wanted to discuss physics, you went to the Grecian, where the Royal Society Fellows gathered. If you wanted literary gossip, you went to Will's in Covent Garden to hear the poet John Dryden hold court. The atmosphere was electric with the sudden clarity. Trace the path of the molecule in a room full of wig-wearing intellectuals. A scientist, perhaps Isaac Newton himself, though he was a notoriously solitary man, his peers were all coffee drinkers, takes a sip. The caffeine floods his system. The adenosine is blocked. The dopamine flows. The mind, previously accustomed to the sluggish rhythm of the sun and the stupor of beer, is suddenly vibrating at a higher frequency. The abstract becomes tangible. The complex becomes solvable. The erratic rhythm of nature, the rising and setting sun, is replaced by the mechanical ticking of the pocket watch. The coffee house did not close at dusk. The candles burned late. The caffeine allowed the thinkers to steal hours from the night. It is no coincidence that the Age of Reason, the Enlightenment, coincided perfectly with the arrival of caffeine in Europe. The very metaphor of the Enlightenment, the light entering the dark room, is a perfect description of the caffeine experience. The old superstitions, the foggy dogmas of the medieval past were being burned away by the harsh, bright light of rational inquiry, fueled by a drug that demanded alertness. In 1687, Isaac Newton published the Principia Mathematica, describing the laws of gravity and motion. It is the foundational text of modern physics. It was a work of immense, sustained mental focus, the kind of focus that coffee facilitates. In the coffee houses of Paris, the philosophes, Voltaire, Diderot, Rousseau, gathered at the Café Procope. Voltaire was said to drink 40 cups of coffee a day, mixed with chocolate. It was on this dangerous dosage of stimulants that he wrote his plays and pamphlets, attacking the tyranny of the church and the state. The encyclopedia, that great attempt to categorize all human knowledge, was plotted over steaming cups. The French Revolution, it is said, began in a café. On July 12, 1789, Camille Desmoulins leaped onto a table outside the Café de Foix. With a pistol in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other, or at least, with the caffeine coursing through him, he shouted, "To arms, citizens!" The lethargy of the oppressed was broken. The stimulant had done its work. The crowd marched to the Bastille. But let us return to London, to the quieter revolution of commerce. Before coffee, business was done in the Royal Exchange or in taverns. It was slow. It was often sealed with a drink. But the new capitalist economy required a different mindset. It required precision. It required calculation. It required the ability to track complex variables, interest rates, shipping schedules, risk assessments. At Jonathan's Coffee House in Change Alley, stock jobbers gathered to buy and sell shares in companies. They needed to be sharp. A mistake in a tavern might mean a headache the next morning. A mistake in the coffee house meant ruin. The London Stock Exchange was born here, amidst the clatter of cups. At Lloyd's, sea captains and merchants gathered to insure their ships. They shared information about the weather, about pirates, about the tides. They were building a global network of risk management, all fueled by the bean from Ethiopia. The drowsy medieval mind was being startled awake. The agricultural time, the cyclical time of the seasons, was being replaced by merchant time, the linear time of profit and loss, of schedules and deadlines. Even the language of the time reflects this shift. Prose became sharper, less flowery. The novel was born. The newspaper became a daily habit. The public sphere, that crucial space between the government and the private home where public opinion is formed, was physically located in the coffee house. But let us not romanticize it entirely. It was a gritty, smoky, hyper-masculine world. The women's petition against coffee in 1674 complained that men were spending all their time in these establishments, returning home with nothing moist but their snotty noses, nothing stiff but their joints, and nothing standing but their ears. They complained that the newfangled, abominable, heathenish liquor was making their husbands impotent talkers rather than active lovers. It was a humorous pamphlet, but it revealed a truth. The domestic sphere was being abandoned for the intellectual sphere. The men were married to the bean. As the 18th century progressed, the tea from China would eventually challenge coffee's dominance in Britain, thanks to the East India Company and the influence of the Queen. But the damage, or the gift, was done. The mind of the West had been permanently altered. The drowsy giant had woken up. The wheels of industry were beginning to turn. The steam engine was being perfected. The scientific method was being codified. And hovering over it all like a presiding spirit was the aroma of roasted coffee. The penny university had graduated its first class. They were wired, they were ambitious, and they were ready to build a new world. The mist of the Thames still hangs over the city, but the lights are on. The candles are burning in the windows of Fleet Street. The printing presses are churning, and in the porcelain cups the black liquid trembles, a dark mirror reflecting the face of the modern Menanxius, alert and relentlessly awake. The dawn of reason has arrived, and it smells of smoke and caffeine. The gentle clinking of porcelain in the Enlightenment salon fades into the distance, swallowed by a sound that is deeper, louder, and infinitely more rhythmic. We must cover our ears now, for the quiet contemplation of the philosopher is being replaced by the roar of the Leviathan. We are crossing the threshold into the 19th century. The sky above us darkens, not with storm clouds, but with the heavy, greasy soot of burning coal. The pastoral silence, the silence that has held the world since the Eocene, finally, irrevocably shattered. We enter the age of iron. We enter the black country of the English Midlands, the textile valleys of New England, the steel forges of the Ruhr. Here, the landscape itself has been vivisected. The green hills are gashed with canals and railways. The rivers do not run clear, they run purple with dye and gray with slag. And rising above the brick tenements are the new cathedrals of humanity, the factories. They are vast, windowed cliffs of masonry, filled with the deafening chant of power looms and spinning mules. In this new world, the sun has lost its authority. For the entirety of human history, the rising and setting of the sun dictated the rhythm of life. You rose with the light to tend the crops. You slept when the dark made work impossible. The body was attuned to the celestial sphere, but the machine does not care for the sun. The steam engine does not sleep. It does not tire. It demands to be fed with coal and water, and in return, it spins the gears of industry with a relentless, terrifying consistency, 24 hours a day. To keep pace with this mechanical god, the human animal had to be reinvented. The human body, with its frailties, its need for rest, its natural dips in energy, was the weak link in the chain of production. A man cannot work 16 hours on a loom by will alone. The biological imperative to sleep is too strong. The circadian rhythm, encoded in our DNA, demands that we shut down when the light fails. And so, the silent guardian of the canopy was drafted into the service of the machine. Caffeine ceased to be the lubricant of debate. It became the fuel of the proletariat. It became the black oil of the human motor. Picture the life of a textile worker in Manchester in 1840. The air inside the mill is thick with flue, microscopic cotton dust that coats the lungs. The noise is a physical weight, a constant thrum that vibrates in the teeth. The heat is tropical, maintained to keep the threads from snapping. The shift begins before dawn and ends long after dark. To survive this ordeal, to keep the eyes open and the hands moving among the dangerous whirling gears, the worker turned to the teapot and the coffee mug. It was no longer a beverage of leisure, it was a utility. In the cramped, damp row houses of the industrial slums, the kettle was always boiling. Tea, often brewed black and thick, sweetened with cheap sugar from the Caribbean colonies, became the staple of the working-class diet. It was a tragic alchemy. The sugar provided the caloric spike, the quick hit of energy, while the caffeine blocked the adenosine, masking the deep structural exhaustion of the body. This was phantom energy. It was a loan taken out against the future health of the worker. It allowed a woman to stand on her feet for 12 hours. It allowed a child, working as a piecer under the looms, to stay awake just enough to avoid being crushed. The molecule, C8H10N4O2, was bridging the gap between what the human body could do and what the industrial economy demanded. It was the only thing that made the intolerable tolerable. But where did this black river come from? As the factories of Europe hungered for fuel, the pressure radiated outward to the edges of the empire. We must cast our gaze briefly to the other side of the world, to the tropical belts where the caffeine plants grow. The Industrial Revolution in the West was powered by the Agricultural Revolution in the South. In Ceylon, modern Sri Lanka, in India, in Java, and in Brazil, the rainforests were cleared. The diverse, chaotic canopy of the Eocene was replaced by the monoculture of the plantation. The coffee plant and the tea bush were lined up in military rows, extending for miles over the hills. This was the industrialization of nature itself. The plants were pruned, fertilized, and harvested with a ruthless efficiency to feed the insatiable thirst of the northern cities. In a tragic twist of botanical fate, the coffee plantations of Ceylon were wiped out in the 1860s by a fungal disease known as Himalaya vastatrix, the devastating Emily. The leaves turned to rust and fell. The trees died. This ecological catastrophe shifted the drinking habits of the British Empire. As the coffee withered, the planters turned to tea. They planted the Camellia sinensis on the graves of the coffee trees, and so the British worker became a tea drinker, while the American worker, whose supply came from the unaffected fields of Brazil, remained loyal to the bean. The distinction is subtle, but the chemistry is the same. Whether it was the builder's tea of Liverpool or the cowboy coffee of the American West, the function was identical: to override the body's natural limits. As the 19th century ground into the 20th, the pace of the world accelerated. The telegraph transmitted information at the speed of light. The train collapsed distance. The electric light bulb, the final conqueror of the night, banished the shadows entirely. The human race was now operating in a state of permanent, artificial wakefulness. And then, the machines turned on their masters. The year is 1914. The whistle of the factory is replaced by the scream of the artillery shell. The Great War begins. If the factory was a test of endurance, the trench was a test of sanity. We must descend now into the mud of Flanders and the Somme. The world here has been reduced to its elemental forms: earth, water, fire, and wire. The sky is gray and lethal. The ground is a churning slurry of freezing mud. In this hellscape, the soldier is pushed to the absolute breaking point of human resilience. He stands watch in the freezing rain for days on end. He lives in a state of perpetual adrenaline, his nervous system fried by the constant threat of death. Sleep is impossible or dangerous. To sleep on watch is to invite the enemy. To sleep is to freeze. To sleep is to face the court-martial. Here, caffeine became more than a fuel. It became a savior. It became a warm comfort in the cold mud. The military planners understood this. The British Army, the French Army, and later the American Expeditionary Force all prioritized the delivery of coffee and tea above almost everything else, save for ammunition. It was the morale booster of last resort. Picture a soldier in a dugout, huddled over a small, smokeless stove. His hands are trembling with cold and shock. He boils a tin cup of water. He takes a packet of brown powder and dumps it in. This brings us to a crucial innovation in the biography of the molecule, the invention of instant coffee. Before the war, coffee was a delicate thing, beans that had to be roasted, ground, and brewed. It was a process. But the trenches had no time for process. In 1910, an inventor named George Constant Washington, an English chemist living in Guatemala, noticed a powdery buildup on the spout of his silver coffee pot. He realized it was the condensed vapors of coffee. He refined the process, creating a soluble powder that could be rehydrated instantly. He called it Red E-Coffee. When the Americans entered the war in 1917, the War Department bought his entire output. It was not a gourmet experience. It was acrid, metallic, and muddy. But to the doughboy in the trench, it was a miracle. It was hot, it was brown, and it contained the alkaloid. They called it a cup of George. Imagine the sensory experience of that cup. The smell of the instant coffee mixing with the smell of wet wool, cordite, and unwashed bodies. The soldier wraps his hands around the tin. The heat seeps into his frozen fingers. He brings it to his lips. The liquid goes down. The caffeine hits the bloodstream. For a brief moment, the terror recedes. The mind sharpens. The connection to hometown, the kitchen table, to the diner, to the peace of the pastis re-established. Nobody can soldier without coffee, a Union cavalryman had written during the American Civil War, and the sentiment held true in the trenches of France. It was the liquid courage that allowed men to go over the top. It was the chemical vigilant that kept the sentry's eyes open as he peered into no man's land, waiting for the shadow that moved. In the skies above, the pilots of the new air forces carried flasks of coffee into the freezing cockpit. Flying at altitude, in open cockpits, with hypoxia tugging at their consciousness, the caffeine kept them alert. It was the co-pilot of the aerial war. The war solidified the industrialization of the molecule. It proved that caffeine could be processed, packaged, and shipped like bullets. It proved that the human army ran on the bean as much as the truck ran on petrol. When the guns finally fell silent in 1918, the world had changed. The soldiers returned home, but they did not leave their habit in the trenches. They brought the thirst for the quick cup back with them. The pace of life did not slow down, it sped up. The roaring 20s exploded with a frenetic, jazz-fueled energy. And here, in the interwar years, the final transformation of the coffee culture took place. The Italian inventors, frustrated by the slowness of brewing, began to experiment with pressure. They wanted to force the water through the coffee, to extract the oil and the caffeine in a matter of seconds. In 1938, Achille Gaggia filed a patent for a steam-free coffee machine. He used a piston to force water at high pressure through the puck of ground coffee. The result was a small, concentrated shot of intense flavor, topped with a golden foam known as crema. They called it café espresso, pressed-out coffee. It was coffee for a world in a hurry. It was a shot of pure velocity. The espresso bar became the symbol of the modern urban life. You stood at the counter, you threw back the shot. You walked out, wired and ready. The ritual of the long, slow boil was gone. The Midnight Vigil of the Sufi mystic had been compressed into a 30-second extraction. And then came the Second World War, the conflict that would spread the American style of coffee to the ends of the earth. The American GI, traveling with his rations of instant coffee, found the European espresso too strong, too bitter. He would ask the locals to water it down, to fill the cup with hot water. The Italians, watching this dilution with horror, called it the Americano. It is a fitting name, for the American century was the caffeine century. The diner, with its bottomless cup of weak, hot coffee, became the sanctuary of the salesman, the truck driver, the night nurse. The coffee break became a federally protected ritual of the workplace, a recognition that the human machine needs to be oiled. As we look back at the black oil of industry, we see a substance that has been completely transformed. It began as a shield for a leaf in the prehistoric jungle. It became a sacrament for the mystic. It became a muse for the philosopher. But in the age of the machine, it became a utility. It was processed, freeze-dried, vacuum-packed, and commodified. It was stripped of its mystery and sold as fuel. Picture the freeze-drying plant in the mid-20th century. Giant stainless steel vats. The coffee is brewed in massive quantities, then frozen into slabs of dark ice. The air is sucked out of the chamber, creating a vacuum. The ice undergoes sublimation, turning directly from solid to gas, leaving behind the skeleton of the coffee, the crystals of pure flavor and caffeine. It is a marvel of chemical engineering, but it is also a kind of violence. The soul of the plant is extracted, preserved, and suspended in time, waiting for the kettle to whistle. This industrialization of the molecule mirrored the industrialization of society. We became a species of preserved energy, of ready-to-mix potential. We built a world of neon lights and 24-hour supermarkets, of red-eye flights and graveyard shifts. And through it all, the dark river flowed. It flowed into the veins of the truck driver crossing the dark continent on the interstate. It flowed into the mug of the astronaut preparing for launch. It flowed into the thermos of the steelworker on the night shift. The sun had set on the old world. The pastoral silence was gone forever. The stars were drowned out by the glow of the city. But down here, on the pavement, the lights were bright. The eyes were open. The gears were turning. The molecule had done its work. It had successfully recalibrated the human species. We were no longer creatures of the day. We were the masters of the night, powered by the black oil, racing forward into a future that would demand even more speed, even more alertness, and even less sleep. The steam hisses, the piston fires, the cup is drained, the machine marches on. And so we arrive at the final shore of our journey. We have traveled through the deep time of the Eocene jungle, walked the volcanic slopes of Ethiopia, sat in the mist of the Chinese mountains, spun with the Dervishes of Yemen, debated in the smoke of London, and endured the trenches of the Great War. Now, the timeline dissolves into the immediate present. We stand in the soft blue glow of the electric dawn. The history books are closed, the ancient scrolls are rolled away. What remains is the ritual that is happening right now, perhaps in a room very close to where you lie, or in a city on the other side of the world where the sun is just beginning to breach the horizon. The story of caffeine in the modern age is no longer a story of discovery. It is a story of ubiquity. It is the story of a world that has been completely, irrevocably wired by the molecule. Picture the Earth as seen from space, hanging in the velvet void. As the Terminator line, the shadow that divides night from day, sweeps across the face of the planet, it triggers a sequential awakening. It is a wave of consciousness that moves at 1,000 miles an hour, and riding the crest of this wave is the aroma of roasting beans and steeping leaves. The wave hits Tokyo first. In the neon canyons of Shinjuku and Shibuya, the vending machines, millions of them, glowing like sentinels on every corner, hum with the cooling fans of canned coffee. The salaryman, adjusting his tie in the reflection of the glass, coins a cold tin of Boss or Georgia coffee. He cracks the tab, stand-downs the liquid shot. It is the same alkaloid that fueled the Tang Dynasty poets, but now it is delivered in aluminum, consumed amidst the electronic chirp of the crosswalk signals. The city wakes up, not to the rooster, but to the caffeine. The wave moves west. It sweeps across the vast tea gardens of India and Sri Lanka, where the descendants of the colonial plantations still pluck the leaves in the mist. It hits the chaotic, vibrant streets of Mumbai, where the chaiwalas pour sweet, milky tea from high brass pots into small clay cups, the stream stretching like a dark ribbon in the air. The clay cups are smashed on the ground after use, returning to the earth a cycle of consumption and destruction that mirrors the fleeting nature of the energy itself. The wave crosses the Bosphorus, entering Europe. In Rome, the shutters are thrown open. The bars are filling up. Here, the ritual is standing room only. The espresso machine, a gleaming chrome altar of the 20th century, hisses with steam. The barista moves with the speed of a boxer, grind, tamp, lock, extract. The porcelain clinks against the saucer. The patron drinks the café in a single gulp, standing at the marble counter. It is a communion of speed. There is no time for the long philosophical debates of the London coffee house. The modern world moves too fast. The caffeine is a pit stop, a quick injection of fuel to merge onto the highway of the day. And then, the wave crosses the Atlantic. It hits the eastern seaboard of America. It creeps into the quiet kitchens of the suburbs. Let us linger here, in the intimacy of the domestic morning. This is perhaps the most sacred space the molecule occupies today. It is 6 a.m. in a farmhouse in Kansas, or a high-rise apartment in New York, or a bungalow in California. The house is silent. The family sleeps. The world outside is gray and indistinct. You enter the kitchen. The floor is cold beneath your feet. You are alone. There is a profound comfort in the preparation of the morning cup. It is a ceremony of small, precise movements that anchors us before the chaos of the day begins. You reach for the bag of beans. Maybe they are from Ethiopia, returning us to the beginning of our story. Maybe they are from Sumatra or Colombia. You open the bag, and the scent escapes that rich, heavy perfume that smells of earth, chocolate, and distant fires. It is an olfactory time machine. In a single breath, your brain recognizes the promise. Help is coming. Clarity is coming. You pour the beans into the grinder. You press the button. The noise is loud, a jagged tear in the morning silence. But it is a welcome noise. It is the sound of the day starting. The beans are shattered, increasing their surface area, exposing the soluble treasures within. Then, the water. You fill the kettle. You listen to the rising pitch of the boil, the low rumble turning into a seething hiss. The physics of phase change, liquid turning to gas. You pour the water over the grounds. If you are making a pour-over, you watch the bloom, the way the coffee swells and bubbles as it releases carbon dioxide, the gas trapped during the roasting process. It looks like the earth breathing. The water turns dark. It drips through the filter, guided by gravity, extracting the oils, the sugars, and the caffeine. You hold the warm ceramic in your hands. This moment, the cup check, is universal. The heat transfers from the mug to your palms, warming the blood. You lift it to your lips. You blow away the steam. You take the first sip. Let us trace, one last time, the journey of the molecule within the cathedral of the human body. It slides down the throat, warm and bitter. It enters the stomach. Within 20 minutes, it has been absorbed into the bloodstream. It hitches a ride on the highway of the arteries, pumped by the heart to every corner of the system. But its true destination is the brain. Here, in the microscopic canyons of the synapses, the great war of the morning is fought. Throughout the night, or throughout the previous day, a chemical called adenosine has been building up. Adenosine is the drift of snow that slows the wheels. It is the fog that descends on the valley. It binds to receptors, telling the neurons to slow down, to rest, to sleep. The caffeine molecule, C8H10N4O2, is the master of disguise. It looks almost exactly like adenosine. It is a chemical imposter. It slides into the receptors, blocking them, locking the door. The adenosine floats by, unable to dock, unable to deliver its message of fatigue. And because the brakes have been cut, the brain's accelerator engages. Dopamine, the neurotransmitter of pleasure and motivation, is released. Glutamate, the chemical of memory and learning, fires more easily. The pituitary gland detects the increased activity and releases a tiny squirt of adrenaline. The result is the gentle nudge. The fog lifts. The lights in the room seem to get brighter. The emails you have to write, the spreadsheet you have to fill, the code you have to debug, they no longer seem impossible. They seem manageable, even exciting. The promise of productivity has been kept. This is the pulse of the modern morning. It is a chemically assisted optimism. It is the feeling that we can face the complexity of modern life, that we can keep up with the machines we have built. But the modern landscape of caffeine is not just about the solitary kitchen or the frantic espresso bar. We have entered a new era, a third wave, that looks back to the ancient reverence of the Sufis and the tea masters. In the cities of the 21st century, in Seattle, in Melbourne, in Berlin, in Sola, new kind of temple has been built. The modern specialty coffee shop is a place of almost religious minimalism. The walls are white, the wood is pale ash, the machines are precision instruments of chrome and glass. Here, the barista is not just a server. They are a craftsman, a descendant of the tea master Lu Yu. They weigh the dose to the gram. They measure the temperature of the water to the degree. They talk of terroir, the taste of the soil, the altitude, the variety. They treat the coffee cherry not as a commodity, but as a fruit. In these spaces, we see the reconciliation of the industrial and the organic. We are using high-tech scales and refractometers to understand a seed that evolved in the Eocene jungle. We are drinking the biography of the molecule with a newfound respect. We are tasting the blueberry notes of the Ethiopian harar, the earthy spice of the Indonesian Sumatra, the bright acidity of the Kenyan peaberry. We are drinking the map of the world. And who are the people sitting in these cafes, bathed in the soft light of their laptop screens? They are the new knowledge workers. They are the coders, the writers, the designers, the traders. They are the direct descendants of the men in the London coffee houses of the 17th century. They are not discussing the divine right of kings. They are discussing algorithms, blockchain, climate change, and artificial intelligence. Caffeine is the current that runs through this invisible web. Consider the internet, that vast digital nervous system that wraps the planet. It is built of code, and that code was written by human beings. It was written late at night and early in the morning. It was written by minds kept alert, line by line, by the mug on the desk. There's a joke in the computer science world that a programmer is simply an organism that turns coffee into code. It is a humorous reduction, but it touches on a truth. The architecture of the virtual world, the apps, the websites, the streaming services, the AI you are interacting with right now, was built on a foundation of caffeine. It is the fuel of the information age, just as coal was the fuel of the industrial age. It allows the stock trader in London to sync with the opening bell in New York. It allows the student in Beijing to study for an exam that will determine their future. It allows the nurse in the ICU to stay vigilant at 3 a.m. when the monitors are beeping. It is the dark oil of the human intellect, the invisible infrastructure that keeps the global mind awake. And yet, despite its power, despite its industrial scale, despite the billions of cups consumed every single day, caffeine retains a feeling of intimacy. It feels like home. Why is this? Why does a psychoactive stimulant feel like a hug? Perhaps it is because it is one of the few rituals we have left. In a secular world where the old liturgies have faded, the morning cup is a small, private prayer. It is a moment of mindfulness. It is a constant in a world of variables. No matter where you are, no matter how strange the city or how difficult the day, the smell of coffee or tea is the same. It is a sensory anchor. It connects us to the earth. When you inhale the steam, you are inhaling the volatile compounds of a plant. You are inhaling the rain and the sun and the soil of the tropics. In a life lived mostly indoors, on screens, in concrete boxes, the cup is a lifeline to the wild, green world of the canopy. It connects us to the past. When you drink, you are drinking with Kaldi. You are drinking with Shennong. You are drinking with Bach, with Voltaire, with Teddy Roosevelt, with the soldiers in the trenches and the suffragettes in the meeting halls. You are part of the great caffeinated chain of being. But now, the day is done. The narrative arc of the stimulant must eventually bend toward rest. The sun that rose in Tokyo and swept across the world has now dipped below the horizon in the west. The electric dawn has turned into the electric night. The coffee shops are closing. The machines are being backflushed, the portafilters wiped clean. The lights are dimmed. The hum of the vending machines seems quieter in the empty streets. And in the body, the tide is turning. The liver, that silent chemical factory, has been working all day to break down the molecule. It strips away the methyl groups, dismantling the caffeine, ushering it out of the system. The blockade on the adenosine receptors is lifting. The brakes are being reapplied. The gentle heaviness returns. The eyelids grow soft. The muscles release their tension. The artificial sharpness of the day blurs into the impressionistic softness of the night. It is time to put the cup down. It is time to let the chemistry fade. As you lie there, drifting toward the borderland of sleep, consider the irony of this story. We have spent thousands of words exploring the history of wakefulness, of the drug that banishes sleep. We have celebrated the alert mind, the dancing goat, the spinning dervish. But the value of wakefulness is defined by the quality of the sleep that follows it. The caffeine molecule is the yang to the yin of rest. We cannot have the day without the night. We cannot have the brilliance of the enlightenment without the dark, restorative silence of the cave. The plant knows this. In the jungle, the coffee shrub closes its stomata at night. It rests. It gathers its strength for the next photosynthesis, for the next synthesis of the bean. The history is complete. The circle is closed. You have walked the long path. You have seen the beetle fall from the leaf. You have smelled the roasting fire in the monastery. You have heard the scratching of the quill in the coffee house and the roar of the steam engine in the mill. You have felt the pulse of the modern city. But now, the machines are quiet. The penny universities are empty. The internet is humming in the background, but you do not need to check it. The invisible web will hold the world together while you are gone. The cup is empty. The ceramic is cool. Let the silent guardian return to the canopy. Let the emerald mist settle back onto the mountain. Let the wine of Araby return to the jar. The stimulation fades. The heartbeat slows to a calm, rhythmic drum. The breathing deepens. The gentle nudge of the morning gives way to the heavy, warm embrace of the night. You are safe. You are tired. You are ready. Let the history rest. Let the silence return. Sleep.